Yeah, no problem.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. It's definitely kind of an honor to be presenting at the very first virtual Drupal TO. Here to talk, as Eden introduced us, about using embedded Angular in a Drupal project we did for the University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies. So my name again is Anderson-Clutz. On this project, I was acting as Drupal Solutions Lead, and with me to present is Dylan Rieder, who is the tech lead.
Hello.
So let's start by talking a little bit about the opportunity. So from kind of a high level, this is what the architecture looked like for the previous site that the school had. They were using DestinyOne, which is kind of a data solution that's really engineered specifically for continuing studies programs and helping them to manage, courses and other information. There was also a custom middleware piece that the school had built to augment that data, and all of that fed into an Angular application that they had sitting on top of a WordPress site. But there wasn't really any I'll say direct sharing of data between the Angular piece and the WordPress app. So the limitations that created was that the actual individual courses didn't have individual URLs, and so they couldn't be crawled properly for SEO, they couldn't be shared socially, all of those things. They couldn't really link between related content just because there wasn't really a way to direct the browser properly to different types of content. And there was actually a search mechanism built into that Angular app, but it could only search the actual course information. It couldn't provide results from other types of content. And in terms of syncing the data into the Angular app, there was a delay. It would only run 4 hours, and so there could be a delay of up to 4 hours when making changes before those would actually get reflected on the site. So for anyone who's not familiar with Angular, I thought it would be good to give a bit of a quick overview so you sort of understand the opportunities and the challenges of working with Angular. It's a TypeScript-based web application framework, which is kind of a fancy way of saying that it's an augmented version of JavaScript. It was developed by Google and then made open source. And it uses a hierarchy of components to provide dynamic views and uses asynchronous template compilations, which are all very fancy words, so I thought maybe it would be helpful to give a bit of a diagram that hopefully will help to illustrate how those pieces kind of work together. So the idea being that there's a template that exists within the actual page, and then the Angular app uses injector services to basically, in kind of a live way within the web page, continuously update the contents of that template. So it really helps to give web pages kind of that app-like dynamic feel. So we mentioned DestinyOne, thought we would talk a little bit more about that. They describe themselves as a student lifestyle management software, but it really is sort of purpose-built for different kinds of managing data specifically for continuing education. And, all through, it has been the ultimate source of truth for course information, and particularly things like enrollment and availability data. It does have its own web UI that some schools have used, but we've talked to people that have tried to customize that and said that it's sometimes a frustrating experience. It also does have its own limited range of APIs, but that's why the school had decided to go ahead and implement its own solution to really sort of augment and extend the data that was available to be managed in that DestinyOne application. So they put together something that they call Mimer. I'm sure there was a time when I could remember what that acronym stood for, but those days are long past. It's really a custom middleware solution to allow them to either extend the fields and data available for some of the pieces that are already being managed by DestinyOne, but also to manage and associate those with other kinds of data. So for example, instructor biographies or associations that they're affiliated with, and sort of certificates and just different types of data. And as we mentioned already, it's fully custom, and so they have complete flexibility in terms of how it functions, what data it outputs, at what frequency, and so on. So we're going to throw around a lot of terminology that's really specific to the school. I thought it might be helpful to sort of give a quick diagram that gives you a sense of the hierarchy and how some of these things interrelate, but there won't be a test on this or anything. So probably the key one is just understanding that there's a bit of a hierarchy between programs, courses, and sections. So now we're going to talk about the solutions. So I'll give it over. Oh, actually, this is still me. End state. In terms of how this turned out for the final architecture, then you can see that we kept the pieces in place that really drive the data behind, particularly the academic pieces of the information that's being provided to prospective students, but really wanted to try and augment the way that data can really inform the overall website experience. So we did some ingesting of the data by Drupal itself, and then also made sure that all of the data, both information coming from Mimer as well as content being created with Drupal, was all going together into Solr to really provide a very rich search experience. So the advantages of this final architecture were that all the content could have distinct URLs. So again, for SEO and social sharing. We could provide robust interlinking of kind of related content. By having all of that information indexed together, we could provide a really rich search experience. And then we also implemented drush commands so that whenever they needed to do a sync, either on an ad hoc basis or as a companion to some kind of a database update that they might be running on their own end, they could update the data on the website as well. In terms of some changes that the school itself had to make to Mimer, they revised the export to some of the pieces that were already being fed into the previous Angular app. And they also added export for additional pieces that they wanted to really make available on the website that previously had been managed in Mimer, but that data wasn't really being exposed to their website. And again, created and integrated those drush scripts for achieving the two-way sync of data. So I thought it would be useful to give you guys a quick look at how the website looked. You can see it uses a lot of strong use of photography. Search experience was something that they really wanted up front and center. I will say as a side note that at the time this was built, Layout Builder was not yet stable. And so we actually used a module called Bricks to give editors control over dynamic layouts. Here's a look at a course page, and I can highlight here on the right where you see the course details. That's all data that actually doesn't live in Drupal at all. That's being displayed through an embedded Angular widget. And here we can see actually there's a blend of different information, some of which, so as an example, the image above or some of the introductory content here actually is managed within Drupal, whereas a lot of the information that's really around sort of related certificates and so on is really being pulled from the Angular app. So it's really that blend or a hybrid of presentation from some from Drupal and some from Angular. And then a little further down that course page is an example of where you start to see more of the functionality that you can achieve by leveraging Angular. So there's this kind of a dynamic list that the user can filter and sort using based on different data. And then if you open up one of those, you can actually see section information that's pulled from a separate set of JSON data specifically for an individual section that they might be interested in attending. So now we're going to get into implementation, and for that I will pass it over to Dylan.
All right. Hi guys, can everyone hear me? Yep. Okay, so first off, thank you for having me. So kind of just jumping right into the implementation. You're about to hear the word Mimer a lot. I apologize for that. But here we go. So like Martin said, one of the issues the client kind of mentioned was that they definitely wanted to have content on the site kind of be filterable by distinct URLs and things like that, but also the need that they didn't want to constantly having to be updating the content on both Mimer and the Drupal site itself. So kind of what we settled on is what we call a Mimer stub. So when I say stub, what I'm referring to is basically it is taxonomy and content types we created that basically represent Mimer content on the Drupal site. The stubs themselves only receive a very minimal amount of information from Mimer. Really, the only things they are receiving are the external Mimer ID, the title of what that piece of content is, and also any references to other stubs that are done through Mimer's external ID. So for each stub, in order to properly link that within Drupal, we basically do a entity hook pre-save call that finds existing Mimer IDs within the Drupal site and then links those two node entities together. So again, one of the advantages of us kind of by being able to do this is we're kind of able to leverage the full potential of Drupal as a CMS without causing additional work where they have to basically go back and update it in two places at once. It also allows us to kind of be a little more customizable when it comes to individual courses. So they can add things like individual photos or imagery that they feel really strikes a tone with that kind of thing. For instructors, we can have individual photos. But what's important to note is because we are importing some fields, we did make sure that we hid them either in the form display or through custom means where necessary when it came to stuff like title. So kind of now that we've created these stubs, the next part was actually, laying out what we're actually getting from Mimer. So the main way that the site interacts with Mimer is through a large series of JSON files sent to a specific directory that lives within the site. For each entity that kind of exists within the Drupal site is a subdirectory that contains two types of files. So there is one generic, or there is one overall import file, and then for each individual entity that exists on the site, there is a kind of more information specifically about that. So as an example, for instructors, there is an instructors.json import feed, and there is for each instructor on the site a more detailed breakdown of that individual instructor. So kind of just jumping into a bit of an example. So this is for courses. You can actually quickly see, or this is, sorry, for programs. This is actually just a quick breakdown of kind of the base feed we would kind of be receiving from Mimer. Worth noting that this is, again, a little outdated. There has definitely been improvements and adjustments from U of T's, from the IT team over at the continuing studies. But again, this is kind of just a basic breakdown of what we're receiving. And then we also have an example here of what an individual program would look like for that individual entity. And we actually have a link here that actually kind of shows what it looks like live on the site. So now that we have Mimer properly sending us this information, the next point becomes, how do we actually get it into Drupal? So what we created was what we call Mimer import. So in order to properly import this, we had to create a system that actually, is able to import it. The way we did this is through a queue processor that basically runs through each Mimer entity added and basically does the following things. From reading the JSON feed import, it will basically look at each individual item, and if a JSON item is referenced, but it doesn't actually exist within the site, it will create a new entity to represent that. If an entity that currently exists on the site doesn't appear in the import feed, it will delete it because it's either been removed or is no longer necessary. And the more important one is if a JSON item has been updated within the last 4 hours, it will update that entity in case of new relational data coming in. So going from there, now that we've kind of imported all of the content, we then need to actually display it. The entire import process could be its own conversation. It's quite in-depth and in charge, but for now, we're here to talk about the Angular portion. So we've made the Mimer Angular module, which is just a custom module that contains the entire application and library. And kind of just to start us off, I'm just going to kind of break down what this structure is. So it is your typical custom module where we basically have a folder called Mimer Angular. Within that, we have a app folder, which is the actual Angular JS application itself. Then we have a assets folder, similar to, you know, kind of how Drupal works. We also have a SRC folder, which then has plugin blocks, which is just block definitions for this custom module. We have a templates folders, which store all of our Twig templates that we use for these Angular blocks. Then we, of course, have the .info file, a libraries reference, and a .module file, which is used for small tweaks that were needed throughout the site. So kind of just to jump into the Mimer Angular libraries file, within it, we just define the following. We have an Angular JS, which is a remote call to the Angular JS script, minified script that's hosted by Google. After that, we have a U of T app, which is the main Angular application. It requires Angular JS for it to work to make sure that when it's loading, we're loading it in the correct order. And then finally, we have a component library for each entity type that has stored data within these Mimer files. And each one of these requires the U of T app, which will then require Angular JS. So going from there, then we built a bunch of blocks, and to kind of work with the Drupal theme, we create a series of blocks with theme overrides that point to these Angular templates that are stored within the /templates folder of this module. Because, like Martin had mentioned, Layout Builder wasn't exactly 100% ready for deployment, we placed these via the standard Drupal block layout. We set only to show these on entities that come from Mimer in their respective areas. So related courses and stuff like that would only show up on courses. From there, basically, we start going into the actual templates themselves. So this is an example of the certificates that are basically listed as part of a program. So basically, it's a pretty standard thing with a couple Angular things thrown up. The one thing I really want to point out is this verbatim tag that we have here that is absolutely crucial when it comes to having it's crucial when it comes to having both Twig and Angular on the same template, but I will kind of talk about that later. So I just kind of want to quickly show what this actually looks like on the live site. So if you take a look here, this available certificates is actually the template itself. And within these, all of these certificates you're seeing are actually being generated through Angular. And then just kind of showing off a little more examples we have here. And this entire course section that we have is completely done through Angular, through a very complex JSON array that we receive on each individual program. So basically, for each program that has these courses, we're sent a lot of information, such as what semesters it's related to, information about it, its delivery methods, and how much does it cost. So from there, like I've mentioned, a major issue that presents itself when you're actually designing these templates is that within Twig and Angular, they actually use the same syntax, which is curly braces, which is why this verbatim tag is critical. So basically what verbatim does is it will say, okay, everything that is within this tag this is what it's supposed to be, and we're not going to render anything on that. So basically, once that's been placed onto the page, Angular can pick that up and start actually injecting its components as needed. But then what happens is, now that we have the information showing, we actually have to be able to direct to it. The issue being, we don't actually have entity links so much as we have the Mimer ID file, the Mimer ID. So basically what we've had to do is create a module called the Mimer redirect that basically will look at the external Mimer ID that we're sent in and find the entity that actually has that ID stored within it. So basically how we did this is it just consists of a controller that designates different routes depending on the context of the Mimer stub being referenced. So as an example, I've posted here, if you actually would to say take a look at one of the applications, you could actually see that instead of actually like a normal Drupal link, it just linking to the thing, we actually have this Mimer redirect, which basically is a reference to a course stored within Mimer with an ID of this. With an ID of a number I'm not even going to say. And basically what it would do is query the database, find the ID, find the entity that has this Mimer ID stored within it, and then correctly redirect to that page. So we've kind of, by doing it that way, we kind of are able to show off, we're able to properly link all of this relational data back between each other, which is very helpful. And now that we've kind of have it this way, what's more important is we can actually make it searchable, which I will actually hand back to Martin for this part.
So part of the challenge of getting all of the content searchable is that we had some content that was really generated within Drupal, but then some content that was really provided by Mimer, and so didn't exist in the same sort of database of content. The helpful part, though, was that because we had the stub content, essentially what we did is we wrote a custom processor so that when Search API starts to go through any of that stub content, we would essentially do a lookup because it has that Mimer ID. We could look up the JSON file that includes all of the actual detailed content for that piece of data, and essentially attach that before it gets ingested for indexing by Solr. And then the only extra part that was required then was making sure that any fields that needed to be used as search facets got sort of added individually, and had to sort of create virtual fields so that Search API would actually sort of properly ingest that data. The other custom piece to the search was that the School of Continuing Studies has a Zendesk sort of knowledge base / help system, and they really wanted anybody running queries to also get results from that at the same time. And so what we ended up providing them is what I would call a Bento Box style search, where they're actually providing search results, in this case, really from 3 different sources of data, and then serving them up in a way that's actually segregated based on the type of data as it's relevant to the actual person running the search. So on the left are facets that really only apply to course and program search results, because in their mind, those were the key pieces of information that they wanted to help clients or visitors be able to find. On the right is that frequently asked questions block that has the results that are retrieved asynchronously from the Zendesk API as soon as the query is run. And then if you go further down the page, there's a separate set of results that's really for any other content. It could be content beyond courses and programs that are from Mimer, or it could also be things like we're seeing here, which is basic pages or narrative stories that are content that's really managed by Drupal itself. So let's talk a little bit about how the project came together, and in particular, let's start with some lessons learned. So we definitely were able to ultimately, through some of the the use of things like the verbatim tag, get Drupal and Angular to play together. The key was to keep the code that they need to use separated so that they could really work independently, and really to let each focus on its strengths. So Drupal being really strong at interrelating different kinds of data, helping people navigate between them, and Angular for helping the people to dynamically interact with that data, within a single page. We also spent a lot of time collaborating because the School of Continuing Study has its own development team. We were sort of both working on similar pieces at the same time, and so there was definitely a higher level of communication, particularly among developers, that was required. So as an example, one of the unusual steps that we took was inviting one of the people from their development team to be in our project Slack, and that way we could get more real-time communication going for critical issues as they came up. In terms of ongoing improvements, the school has really taken over ownership of the site and has continued to do their own development on it. So some of the changes that they've made on the site since launch, they created custom tokens so that data that really only resides within some of those Mimer pieces can actually be used for things like meta tags. They've also added breadcrumbs on some Mimer managed content, again, to help some of that interlinking and people being able to find their way between different types of related data. They've added additional data fields to some of the pieces that are managed by this overall system. So, for example, on the program page that we were looking at earlier, where it had the courses listed, you might have noticed there was a little new flag, and that was actually not there at launch. That's coming from a data field that they've added both within Mimer and then sort of, all through this workflow in terms of how the data gets out to the website. And they've also expanded the display of connected data. So for example, within the sections where they're displayed, making sure that instructor names are displayed there, and then conversely, on the page where you're looking at an instructor profile, being able to display out all of the courses that they actually teach. And so it's an example of being able to use the data to provide more context and help the user move between related pieces of content. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is that one of the main developers for the School of Continuing Studies had never actually worked with Drupal before, had been familiar with WordPress and Angular. And so I thought it would be interesting to get some feedback from her on what the experience was like using Drupal for the first time. And so she said that she definitely appreciated the flexibility of using Drupal. I mean, probably not surprising to anyone who's used Drupal for any length of time. There's a lot of flexibility around managing content types and taxonomies in a very robust way. But she did say she found the admin UI to be less intuitive and sometimes a hindrance for the things she was trying to do. And in particular, the media management was a pain point, although to be fair, when the site launched, again, the media library was not yet stable in core. And I think if it was launching again today, we probably would have used the media library and it would have made things easier. And so with that, I think we're ready to open it up for questions.
Perfect. Yeah.
Sure.
If anyone can, if you'd like to ask a question, just go ahead and type in on chat.
I have one question here that developer typed to me. They're asking what was the criteria that you guys used to choose Angular versus anything else? Was that a personal, or was because the team was more comfortable with it, or what was that? So basically Angular versus React, let's say.
I could start with that, Dylan, if you want, and you can add on if you like. Really, it was actually in some ways driven by the school's development team. That was, Angular was the framework that they were familiar with, and knowing that they wanted to take it back over at the end, that was their preference in terms of leveraging their existing knowledge.
Oh, I see. And would you guys have done anything differently by the end? Like if you had the option, would you rather use something else, or Angular is perfect fine and then just like, you know what, it did the job and we love it?
Do you want to take that one, Dylan?
Personally, like I said, it's with every project, there's one or two things that maybe you could have developed better or done better. Personally, I think Angular definitely did fit the bill for what was needed. Before this project, I had only really used Angular in a lot of test scenarios, so it was kind of cool to actually see it all come together. And again, just be able to handle the vast amount of information we're getting. But yeah, I think Angular overall was a good choice.
Okay, awesome. I see a question here on the chat. So how long did the project take to implement? Start to fin.
I can take this, Martin. So the project, from a development standpoint, like when we actually got basically boots on the ground, people developing, took about a year to complete, from kind of initial implementation to sign off, to client sign off. There are a lot of revisions, a lot of adjustments. and a lot of changes here or there. But yeah, it took us about 8 months or so.
Not bad at all. So the next question is, how long does it take to complete the content importing process from Mimer to Drupal?
That might have varied now that, again, we don't actually have that information anymore. When we were initially, helping set up the site, the import took approximately about 3 minutes or so.
Oh, wow.
But I think the only thing to add there is that it's also designed so that each time it's run, it's typically only doing an incremental data load.
Mm-hmm.
So it's usually faster because it's not loading all of the data.
Yes. Yeah, it is worth noting. Yeah, the second it realizes, the import realizes that something hasn't been updated, it basically just ignores it and then keeps going. We also have it built in a queue process, so we're not overloading the system as we're doing that.
I see. Awesome. So next question here is, if you're using the layout builder, is it possible to expose custom blocks content to Solr or JSON API?
I can maybe take a stab at that one. Because the way we approach particularly the Angular blocks, they're basically implemented as standard blocks within Drupal. And so if you were using Layout Builder, you definitely would be able to place those blocks. I mean, I guess, or potentially you could exclude them depending on how you want it configured, but there would for sure be that possibility. Same thing with the Zendesk being a custom block.
Yep.
Awesome.
Sorry, could I just add on? I think, one of the important things you'd have to make sure, though, is when you're kind of implementing these kind of blocks, what's absolutely critical is that you are, in fact, in the templates or even through the theme preprocess, is that you are referencing these libraries that are created. Because you can have the block show up, but then if the library isn't loaded on the page, it's not going to do anything.
Oh, I see. So I have a question, actually, that's mine. So since talking about layout builder and stuff, you mentioned that you guys use a brick. So how did you guys use brick? Did you use brick to do that glue between layout builder? What was the thought process of using brick? I've used brick before, and I love at the beginning, but then I came across a few issues at the end, such as like revision and that kind of stuff, that we had to kind of write some custom stuff and all that. So then after that, I kind of like, oh, I'm not so sure, even though I love it. Did you guys come across something like this, and why was the reason why you guys use brick?
I can maybe start, and Dylan, you can add on if you like. So when we were starting work on this project, the layout builder was still in beta, and we really were hesitant to, design around something that we weren't sure would be stable for launch. So we also did have some prior experience with bricks, and in particular for, I'll say, a more technically minded client who really appreciated the flexibility and structure of bricks, and in particular the ability to kind of nest things and create dynamic layouts on the fly, even dynamic structures. So the other piece to that is that we had also, I guess, internally developed some reusable pieces for bricks. So some ways to use, multiple column layouts and other pieces like that. And so we were able to reuse that, and it allowed us to put together a really dynamic system that allowed the client to have that flexibility without, I'll say, a lot of sort of fresh custom work, if that makes sense. But really, it was bricks in replacement of Layout Builder for this.
Layout Builder because of the timer, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so if it was today, would you recommend it's like for us, like, yeah, let's start looking into Layout Builder rather?
I would say that for myself, Layout Builder is usually where I would start. I would say even recently at Digital Echidna, we've done a couple of big projects where we've used alternatives to Layout Builder because it's really more about finding the right solution for a particular client's needs. But for myself, in general, I prefer to use a solution that's supported in core if I can.
Perfect.
Anything you want to add to that, Dylan?
Okay.
No. My thoughts pretty much just echo Martin's, where, yeah, it's I think Layout Builder is great, and depending on the scenario, it's needed. Sometimes, again, there are more technical clients where sometimes it actually just isn't feasible, though, I guess. But yeah.
Okay, awesome. So another question from the chat. So what contributed modules were used and most important?
Do you want to take a
Most
stab at that one,
important
Dylan?
modules.
Yeah, so when it comes to contributed modules, at Echidna, we kind of have a base standard ones that we use. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, because it has been a fair bit since we were developing on this site. What are some modules that we used? Again, just a lot of things like admin toolbar was extremely helpful. Just helping the editors process. We did have, actually, I would say one of the bigger one is we did have entity browsers in there. So we had the inline entity browser extension, I believe. Was a very key one, especially just for the editors. Yeah, and if I think of any more during any other questions, I will pipe up.
Awesome.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Martin. Go ahead, Martin.
I was just going to say, I know, we talked about photography being a key piece of the site. So focal point was definitely one that we used. I'm pretty sure we used responsive images on this one. Yeah, a few pieces around sort of managing and optimizing photography as well.
Awesome. So I think you guys answered also the next question, which was in terms of admin interface. Do you leverage modules like admin toolbar and admin toolbar extra? And you just said that yes, you guys did. So.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So next one is Solar on the same server or remote service, and how the project is hosted.
So the site is actually hosted on Pantheon, and so Pantheon offers that as part of its platform. So it's I wouldn't say really on the same server, but definitely within the same platform.
Awesome, go Pantheon. They rock. Okay, awesome. So what was used for the import? So what did you guys use for the import for the migration? Is that a migration API, or what did you guys use?
It was so it wasn't. It was basically a queue processor that we built internally that kind of worked off of that, based off some other work that we've done. Yeah, so it was pretty much 90% custom. But yeah, we did build it off a queue processor and batch processing, just to make sure that again we were trying to optimize its performance.
Oh, I see. Is it because you guys already had the built, and so you guys just want to keep reusing because the company's already familiar with it, or you guys found that by building everything custom, you were able to shave time on the importing and do a better job?
It was more of we had a project with a similar scope that, again, had already kind of built a similar process. So we took it, but we definitely adjusted and changed where needed. It is kind of, at this point, if you would look at the two, you could barely tell. You could barely see how they were related because of, again, the client had a specific need of kind of how relational data works. So, yeah.
Awesome. Awesome.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions, anyone? Last call? No? Okay, so let me take over the screen again. So amazing, awesome. Well, thank you very much, everyone. So this wraps it up for the meetup today. So a huge thanks to our presenters today. It was awesome to learn about that project and like all the hit the thumbs up button on your there's a thumbs up button on your interface. Hit that
if
one
you were in Toronto, everybody's like, yeah.
Yeah, we would be clapping. So thank you very much for the presentation today. That was awesome. I also want to do a big thank you to the co-presenters who today has gone smoothly, which is amazing. And it would be it wouldn't be possible to run these events without the folks that have been helping out today. So thank you so much for your help. And we have our survey. So this is, the price of admission is simply to fill out this survey. We're going to send out a recording of this session today along with the slides in a few days. But no one ever does a survey if it comes later. So please just click on the link. It's bit.ly/DTO all caps -1 and just fill out the survey now. We finished a few minutes early, which is great. So please hop on and do that now. We are running the Drupal Toronto meetup, the virtual version of it for, as far as we can tell, perpetuity, approximately once a month. So our next meetup is already queued up. It's on May 29th, and it's how to write migrations, which, given Drupal 9's coming out, end of life on Drupal 8 and 7 is in November 2021. So this is a super topical topic to review. So we'll be having Hussein from Accelerant doing that presentation. So I'm really looking forward to that one as well. And so thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and have a wonderful day.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you. Great seeing familiar faces, eh? I miss you all, guys.
Awesome.
Okay.
Hey, sorry, I missed the whole thing, but
you did, Suzanne. Suzanne, just join.
I'll come next time.
Awesome.
Yes, join us, Suzanne, next time. It went very well, so it was very good.
Awesome. Perfect. All right, so Blake, you're host, so I think you're the one that can cut the call.
You want me to cut it down? Shut it down?
Or I guess, does anyone want to hang out and chat? Like, I don't know.
I thought I'd leave it for a moment.
Leave it for a few minutes? Okay.
The social aspect of the whole thing. Is
That's right. Yeah, like we do always.
All right, so we did talk about trying to brainstorm ideas